You never think someone you know, someone you trust, could snap like that. But I'm here to tell you it can happen. And when it does, you won't see it coming. I sure as hell didn't. His name was Danny Mercer. We'd been friends since middle school. We did everything together, movies, road trips, late-night drives talking about life. He was the kind of guy you could trust with anything. Laid back, smart, funny, absolutely normal. At least, I thought he was. Until the night he changed. It was a Friday. Just like any other night. We were at my place, sitting in the living room, having beers, watching some dumb horror movie. It was almost midnight when I noticed something was off. Danny had been quiet for a while. Too quiet. At first, I thought he had fallen asleep. But when I glanced over, he was staring at the TV. Not watching, staring. His face was completely blank. Like he wasn't even there anymore. Like something had just switched off inside him. I nudged him. Dude, you good? No response. Not even a blink. Then, without looking at me, he said something. Something that made my stomach tighten. Have you ever thought about what's inside of us? I let out a nervous laugh. What? Like organs and blood? Danny didn't react. He just kept staring at the screen. Then slowly, too slowly, he turned his head toward me. His eyes looked wrong. Too wide. Like he was trying too hard to be normal. We're just meat, he muttered. His lips curled into a weird little smile. Just bags of meat wrapped around something else. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Okay, Danny, what the hell are you talking about? Still smiling, he leaned forward. And whispered. They're inside the walls. I forced a laugh. Dude, you're drunk. But my voice sounded too tight. Danny shook his head slowly. I'm not drunk. Then, still grinning, he stood up. And walked over to the living room wall. Before I could ask what he was doing, he pressed his ear against it. Like he was listening for something. I sat up. Danny. He knocked. Soft. Slow. Then, in a low whisper. I hear them moving. I felt a wave of unease. This wasn't normal. This wasn't Danny. Okay, man, I stood up, trying to keep my voice calm. You're freaking me out. Danny didn't move. His ear was still pressed against the wall. His fingers lightly tapping. Then, without looking at me, he whispered. Have you ever wondered what's under your skin? My mouth went dry. Danny. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. I froze. It wasn't some kitchen knife. It was a box cutter. A long, thin razor blade. The kind used to slice through cardboard. Or flesh. Danny turned toward me, still grinning. And before I could react, he pressed the blade against his own forearm. And sliced. The cut wasn't deep. But it was enough to make my stomach turn. Enough for blood to well up. But Danny didn't even flinch. He just stared at it. Like he was expecting something to happen. I grabbed his wrist. Danny stopped. His head snapped up. And for the first time that night, his expression changed. His smile vanished. His face went completely blank. And in a whisper, he said, It's not supposed to be red. My hands went cold. What? Danny's breathing quickened. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear. Real, genuine terror. His voice shook. I thought it wouldn't be, he swallowed hard. Then, in a hoarse whisper. I thought it wouldn't be blood. I had to get him out of there. I grabbed my phone and texted his brother. Something's wrong. Come get Danny. Then I turned back to him. He was sitting on the couch now. His arm was still bleeding. But he wasn't paying attention to it anymore. He was staring at the TV. I followed his gaze. The horror movie was still playing. A scene with static on the screen. And then, Danny whispered something that made my blood go cold. That's not the movie. I blinked. What? Danny didn't answer. He just pointed at the screen. The static flickered. And suddenly a new image appeared. Not from the movie. Not from the channel. From my living room. It was us. Sitting on the couch. The footage was grainy, distorted. Like a security camera. But I didn't have cameras in my house. And then, the timestamp in the corner flickered. Not from now. From earlier that night. Before we had even sat down. Before Danny had started acting weird. And in the recording. He was already holding the knife. Already staring at me. Already waiting. The recording kept playing. A grainy, flickering video of my own living room. Danny and I sitting on the couch. But in the recording, I wasn't looking at the TV. I was staring at Danny. And Danny? He was already holding the knife. Already gripping it tight. Like he had been waiting for something. For me. I felt sick. My mind was racing. How was this even possible? I had just turned on the TV. This recording, it wasn't there before. And then I heard it. A sharp inhale. Right next to me. I turned. Danny was still there. Sitting on the couch. Staring at the cuts on his arm. But something was wrong. His expression had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was fascination. Like he was seeing himself for the first time. And then, he did something that made my stomach turn. He reached into the wound. I grabbed his wrist. Danny stopped. But his fingers were already inside the cut, pressing into the flesh. I could see the skin pulling apart. The blood pooling onto the couch. And Danny? He was smiling again. Like this was exactly what he wanted. Like he was trying to find something beneath his skin. And then, he whispered. It's moving. I tried to yank his arm away, but Danny snapped. He shoved me hard. I stumbled back, knocking over the coffee table. Before I could get up, he was on top of me. The knife pressed against my shoulder. Too close. Way too close. His breath was ragged. His eyes, wild. Like he wasn't even Danny anymore. You don't understand, he muttered. There's something inside me. Then, before I could stop him, he lifted the knife and stabbed it straight through his own hand. The blade sank deep. Right through the skin, through the tendons. The point buried itself into the floor, pinning his hand in place. I gasped. Blood spilled onto the carpet, pooling fast. But Danny? He just let out a slow exhale. Like it was a relief. Like he had finally caught something. His head tilted. Then he whispered. See? It can't escape now. I scrambled back. My heart was pounding. Danny's hand was still pinned to the floor. The knife shaking slightly with his pulse. But he didn't seem to feel it. Didn't even flinch. Instead, he raised his other hand and grabbed his own throat. Then, he started clawing at it. I lunged forward. Danny stopped. But he was already digging his nails into his neck. Skin splitting open. Blood smearing down his chest. His breath shaky, wet. Like he was choking on something. Then, through bloody fingers, he let out a ragged gasp. And in a hoarse whisper. It's crawling up. I grabbed him. Tried to pull his hands away. He was shaking violently now. Eyes wide and unfocused. His nails kept digging deeper, tearing into the flesh. Like he was trying to pull something out. And then, his whole body convulsed. His mouth opened, and a thick stream of blood poured out. Not dripping. Pouring. Like something had ruptured inside him. And still, he kept whispering. It's inside me. It's inside me. It's inside me. I grabbed my phone. Dialed 911. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. But before I could hit call, Danny's bloody hand grabbed my wrist. His grip was like iron. When I looked into his eyes, I didn't see Danny anymore. Just something empty. Something wrong. And then, through bloody lips, he smiled. Not like before. Not forced. Not confused. This time, he smiled like he had finally figured it out. Like he had just remembered something important. And in a shaky, breathless whisper, he leaned close and said, It's your turn. Then, he lunged. Danny lunged at me. His bloodied hands, slick and trembling, wrapped around my throat. His grip was like iron. Not like my friend. Not like a person at all. His fingernails *** ripped and cracked from clawing at his own skin *** dug into my flesh. I tried to shove him off, but he was too strong. Too fast. And his eyes. They weren't Danny's anymore. They were something else. Something hollow. And the worst part? He was still smiling. Bloody teeth bared like he had been waiting for this. Waiting for me. And then, in a hoarse, wet whisper, he said something that made my blood run cold. It's inside you now. I threw him off. Danny's body slammed into the coffee table, shattering the glass. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for breath. He just lay there, breathing heavy, staring up at the ceiling, still smiling, but his lips were trembling, like he was trying to hold something in. I grabbed my phone, shaking, dialed 911. No signal. I felt my pulse hammer against my skull. That wasn't possible. We were in my living room. We weren't out in the middle of nowhere. Why wasn't my phone working? And then, I heard it. A slow, distant sound from beneath the floorboards. A sound like scratching. My entire body locked up. It was soft at first. Faint. Like something shifting below us. Then, it got louder. More frantic. More hungry. SKRRTCH, SKRRTCH, SKRRTCH. Like nails against wood. Like something trying to get out. I turned to Danny. His laughter was shaking now. Like he was barely holding it in. And then, in a low whisper. You hear it too, don't you? I needed to get out. I ran for the door. Yanked at the handle. Locked. My stomach dropped. I hadn't locked it. I knew I hadn't. But before I could even process that, Danny sat up. His breath came out in short, ragged bursts. He looked down at his chest, at the blood soaking through his shirt, and then, in a trembling voice, he whispered, "I think it's coming out." I took a step back. "Danny." But he wasn't listening. His fingertips pressed against his sternum. His nails dug into his own skin. And then, with a wet tearing sound, he started peeling himself open. His skin split, a deep, shaking cut running down his chest. Dark, thick blood poured out, soaking his clothes, dripping onto the floor, pooling in the cracks of the wooden boards. And then, the scratching underneath us stopped. The whole room went silent, like whatever had been beneath us had finally smelled the blood. Danny let out a weak laugh. His eyes were glassy now. "I told you," he whispered, a thick gurgle in his throat. "I told you it was inside me." Then he collapsed. I couldn't move. Danny's body twitched once, twice, then still. His blood spread across the floor, seeping into the cracks. And then, a noise. Creak. The floorboards beneath him shifted, like something underneath was pressing against them. And then, they snapped open, like a trapdoor, like a mouth. And Danny's body vanished. I staggered back, gasping. The floorboards snapped shut, like nothing had ever happened, like he was never there. But the room was different now. The air felt thicker, like something new was in here with me. Something I couldn't see. I felt it watching me. Inside the walls. Inside me. And then from the other side of the room, I heard a whisper. "It's your turn." Danny was gone. 1 second he was lying in a pool of his own blood. The next, the floor swallowed him, like he had never been there at all, like the house itself had taken him. And now, it wanted me next. I was frozen, heart pounding, hands sticky with Danny's blood. I kept staring at the floor, at the place where he had just been. It looked normal. No broken boards, no hole, no sign that anything had happened. Except for one thing, the blood was still there. Thick, dark smears of it. It had seeped into the cracks of the wood, but something about it looked wrong. The color was too deep, like it had been there for a long time, longer than just a few minutes, like it had always been there, waiting to be seen. I needed to get out. I stumbled toward the door, still sticky with sweat and blood. But the second I reached for the handle, I heard it, a low creaking noise, coming from inside the walls. At first, I thought it was the pipes. But then, I heard breathing. Slow, ragged, like someone was pressed against the other side of the wall, waiting, listening. And then, a voice, Danny's voice, whispering from inside the walls. I never left. I spun around. The living room was empty. No sign of him. No movement. But I knew what I heard. He was still here. Somewhere. Somehow. And then, I saw my reflection in the window. My shirt was soaked in blood. But my face, it was wrong. I stepped closer. The glass was fogged up, but I could still see my own eyes. Wide. Unblinking. Except, they weren't following my movements. I raised my hand. My reflection didn't. It just stood there, staring, smiling. And then, in a low whisper, it spoke. "It's inside you now." I stumbled backward. My hands were shaking. I could still feel Danny's blood drying against my skin. Except, something felt wrong. Like the blood wasn't just on me. It was under my skin. Inside me. And then, slowly, too slowly, I felt something move beneath the surface. A slow, crawling sensation under my forearm. Like something was alive inside of me. Like it was trying to get out. I grabbed the box cutter from the floor. The same one Danny had used. The same one he had pinned his hand to the ground with. I didn't want to do it. But I had to. I had to know. I pressed the blade against my arm. Took a deep breath. And sliced. Pain shot up my arm. Blood welled up instantly, dripping onto the floor. But I barely noticed it. Because underneath the cut, something moved. I saw it. Just beneath the torn skin. A thin, black shape. Twisting. Shifting. Like a vein that wasn't supposed to be there. Like it was alive. I let out a shaky breath. Then I grabbed the blade. And dug deeper. The second I dug into my own flesh, something changed. The lights flickered. The air grew heavy. And then, I heard him. Danny's voice. Not from the walls. Not from the window. From inside my own head. "You shouldn't have done that." I gasped. Clutched my arm. Blood spilled down my fingers. But I barely noticed. Because suddenly, memories that weren't mine started flooding in. Danny's memories. The first night he heard the whispers. The moment he saw his own reflection move on its own. The way the blood crawled under his skin. And the truth, the thing that was inside him had been looking for someone else. And now it had found me. I slammed my back against the wall, gasping. No, I whispered. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. But then, the lights flickered again. The TV turned back on. And on the screen, a new recording played. It was me, sitting on the couch, staring ahead, holding the box cutter in my hand. A fresh cut on my arm, blood pooling onto the floor. And then, I smiled. Just like Danny had. Just like I had been waiting for this to happen. And in the reflection of the TV screen, I saw it, standing behind me. Tall, thin, watching, waiting for me to let it in. The video kept playing. On the screen me, sitting on the couch, holding the box cutter, watching myself bleed. And behind me, a shadow, not a reflection, not a trick of the light, something real, something that was waiting for me to give up, waiting for me to let it in. And deep inside my head, I heard Danny's voice whispering, "It's easier if you don't fight it." I stared at my own reflection, at the blood on my arm. It wasn't stopping. The cut should have clotted by now, but it didn't. It just kept bleeding. Thicker, darker, like it wasn't my blood anymore. And under my skin, I felt something shift, something that wasn't supposed to be there. A thin black line twisting beneath the flesh. Moving, crawling, like it was trying to spread. I clenched my jaw. I knew what this meant. I knew what Danny had tried to do. He wasn't trying to cut something out. He was trying to let something in. I stumbled back, gasping. My vision blurred. The TV screen flickered. And then, for a brief second, a new image flashed on the screen. Not a video. Not a reflection. Just a message. A single line of text written in dark, dripping letters. Let it in. Then the TV shut off. I turned toward the wall. Danny's voice echoed inside my skull. "It doesn't hurt if you let it in." I gritted my teeth. No, I whispered. I wasn't going to be next. I wasn't going to end up like him. And then, before I could think, before I could stop myself, I grabbed the box cutter and dug deep. The blade sank in. Not a little. Deep. Straight into my forearm. I let out a sharp breath, pain exploding up my arm. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I dragged the blade down, splitting the skin wide open. And that's when I saw it. What was really inside me. It wasn't veins. It wasn't muscle. It was something else. Something black. Thread-like. Moving. Shifting. Like tiny tendrils buried beneath my skin. And the moment I exposed them, they twitched. Like they knew I could see them now. Like they were trying to hide. And then, I heard the whisper again. Not in my head. Not from the walls. From inside my own arm. "Why are you fighting?" I screamed. I grabbed a kitchen towel, wrapped it around my arm. Pressed down hard. I needed to stop it from spreading. I needed to stop whatever Danny had let in before it took me too. I stumbled toward the door, my vision going dark at the edges. I grabbed the handle, and this time it opened. I staggered outside. Into the cold air. The night was quiet. No cars. No wind. Like the whole world had gone silent. But I didn't care. I ran. I don't remember much after that. Just flashing red and blue lights. Someone grabbing me. Asking what happened. I remember waking up in a hospital. My arm was stitched up. The doctor said I had lost a lot of blood. That I was lucky to be alive. And when I asked about Danny, they told me there was no one in my house. No body. No sign of a struggle. Just a blood-stained floor in my living room. A stain that wouldn't wash away. They told me I had a psychotic break. That I had done this to myself. That Danny wasn't real. But I know the truth. I know what I saw inside my arm. I know Danny was real. I know he let something in. And now, it's waiting. A month later, I went back to my house. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know. The blood stain was still there. But the floorboards? They looked normal. Like nothing had ever happened. Like the house was hiding something. But the TV was on. Static. Flickering. And then, without warning, a video started playing. I recognized the room instantly. It was my living room. And sitting on the couch was Danny. Smiling. Bleeding. Looking straight into the camera. And in a low whisper he said, "I told you it was inside you." Then, the screen cut to black. And behind me, from inside the walls, I heard a voice. "It's your turn."